I am the last birthkeeper in my lineage. If I hadn't come to birth work completely spontaneously, it would have all ended with me. And it still can. I sit on the edge of awareness itself. Women like me have always been pushed to the margins of history. But I know now that the time has come to tell my story before the story of my ancestors disappears in history forever. In my country, the Maldives, birth is completely medicalized. There are no home births anymore. 25 years ago, a midwifery standardization process was introduced. In the name of safety, all our traditional midwives were required to complete a 6-month training program to keep their license. And overnight, we lost a robust lineage-based traditional system of care.
So my mother was the last generation in my family to receive traditional postpartum care.
I've always had all my babies at home. This is only possible as a Maldivian woman because I don't live in the Maldives. So with my third baby, I decided that I wanted to do things really differently. I didn't want any interventions this time, so I tried to explain this to my midwife at the time, and I was told that this was not possible. So I just decided to discharge myself from the system completely and have a free birth experience. Unfortunately, on the night of my birth, my doula couldn't make it, and it was a really harrowing experience to realize that no one's coming for you. It's really full on. After the baby was born, my placenta wasn't birthing, and by that time I was so exhausted, I just wanted it out of my body. So I was still mid-birth, never experienced birth trauma until then. When I got home from that experience, I called my friend in the Maldives and I told her about my birth. And she talked to her mother, who is a traditional midwife, no longer in practice. And she said, you know, if I had been there, I would have done this and touched her this way, massaged her like that, and the placenta would have just flopped out. I was amazed. It struck me like lightning. I knew immediately that this was something worth saving. In the Maldives, birth once belonged to women. Sometimes midwives would even leave their own families and move in with the mother in the week leading up to birth and for 10 days after she gave birth. She was massaged, nourished, kept warm, and bathed in prayers. Birth unfolded in her own home and in her own rhythm. 9 moons and 9 days. And afterwards, the real care began. 40 days of tending, belly binding, herbal baths. Her feet didn't touch the ground, and she was treated like a queen. And this is what I love about traditional postpartum care. This is my why. This is the heart of my practice. So I seem to draw women to me that are wanting to birth outside the system, to have more control over their birth experience. The first person that wrapped my belly was my mother. She came over after the birth of my first baby, and it was one of the first things that she did. And she told me that after she had given birth to me, a midwife had come to her house and wrapped her belly.
My mom was introduced to belly binding in that instant, and then this beautiful thing happened. because when I gave birth to my first baby, she came and like instinctively just grabbed a scarf and said, the first thing I have to do is wrap your belly, you know? And she didn't have a proper belly bind or anything, but it was like such an instinctive thing that because this was done for her, it just came out of her. And like just seeing the way that the knowledge and the wisdom was flowing, and then it was just cut. It was basically hanging on such a fine thread at the moment.
The cost of losing the lineage is this: we forget who we are. We forget how powerful we are, and the whole world forgets with us. In my country, birth has not become any safer. It is still portrayed as horrific and painful. The C-section rate in the Maldives is 40% and rising. Postpartum depression is rising, and breastfeeding struggles are everywhere. Many new mothers are now choosing cesarean sections for their first birth without any education around breastfeeding afterwards, or even how to heal. Women tell me their traumatic birth stories all the time. In Ayurveda, how a woman heals after she gives birth will affect the next 42 years of her life. So those first 42 days are going to impact her health for the next 42 years. So this is why Ayurvedic postpartum care is so specific. The mother is supposed to be massaged every day with warm oil. So it's like you get broken down by birth, and postpartum rebuilds you.
There are some midwives left. We can go and film some interviews. So we've got some primary material. We just need to go back and actually sit down with these women, sit at their feet and say, what was it like? You know, what did you used to do? What are the plants that you used? And what was the relationships like? That everyone's kind of moving forward. They just want the medicalized version of birth in general. Actually, I feel like it's like a puff of smoke, you know? It'll just disappear. One doesn't step in and collect the information, preserve it, write it down. Time is running out for us.
Science now confirms what indigenous cultures have always known. Trauma, stress, even nourishment can echo through the epigenetic line for up to 7 generations. So when a woman births in safety, sovereignty, and power, she doesn't just change her life, she alters the blueprint for her entire bloodline. It's not a luxury, it's a legacy. We are healing the unseen. The story of my country is not just a tragedy. It's a warning. When we strip birth of support, sacredness, and sovereignty, and when we cut the lines with our ancestors, we don't just harm mothers, we fracture the foundation of society itself. We cannot afford to keep looking away any longer.